So it's 3 after. We have Alicia Bell on the line from the LA Area Chamber of Commerce. Alicia, if you want to just go through some brief welcome and introductions, we can get started.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We have about 40 folks registered for this call from ACCE's Education Attainment Division as well as ACCE's Economic Development Division. So thank you so much for joining us on this call to discuss chambers impacting higher education. I want to welcome everyone. This is our first EAD, or Education Attainment Division, call of 2014. And as many of you know, we have a lot of resources available on ACCE's website. So if you go to the Hero section and click on Chamberpedia, there's an entire section dedicated to education and workforce development, full cradle-to-career spectrum. Today's webinar clearly focusing on higher education, and you'll see a section dedicated to that as well under the Hero tab. Wanted to let everyone know about a few resources the ACCE team is hard at work developing, including an assessment that chambers will be able to use as a self-diagnostic tool if you want to get more engaged in education and workforce development at your local chamber. And we're also working on developing an academy that's going to launch this summer. With that, I'm going to have Jesse introduce our 3 speakers who are here with us, and then we will launch into their remarks.
Thank you, Alicia. And just 1 or 2 more things to add. So this webinar is going to be recorded. Everyone that is attending and signed up will get a copy of the recording as well as the presentation materials that you sent, but the audio as well as the slides. And if you have any questions along the way, we'll have a Q&A at the end of the discussion, and you can type in your questions on the questions panel on your keypad, and we'll answer those at the end. So first we have David Rattray leading the panel. David Rattray is the Senior Vice President of the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce and oversees the Education and Workforce Development Department at the Chamber. He's also President of Unite LA, which is Los Angeles' School to Career Partnership. David has been building business education partnerships towards increasing academic achievement for many years and is Vice Chair of the State Workforce Investment Board's Lifelong Learning Committee. We'll also hear from Dr. Alma Salazar. Alma is Vice President of Education and Workforce Development for the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce, overseeing education and workforce development programs, as well as directing chamber policies related to higher education and workforce development. Alma was appointed to the California Workforce Investment Board in 2012 by Governor Jerry Brown. And finally, we have Jack Scott. Jack is the former chancellor of the California Community Colleges, the nation's largest system of higher education. During his term in 2009, he led 112 colleges through sweeping reforms, and his legacy includes the Associate Degree for Transfer Program and the California Community Colleges Student Success Task Force. Jack served in the California Senate and General Assembly, where he authored 146 bills that were signed into law. And during his tenure in the Senate from 2000 to 2008, he chaired the Senate Committee on Education. So I will let David lead the way.
Thank you, Jesse, and thank you to all of you for joining us for this session. I hope as I go through, and each of us go through, you are taking notes and ask us challenging questions or make make comments so that we can dive deeper as we go across the treetops of some of these issues. So what I'm going to do is give you a little sense of how we were thinking about this question of higher ed. We had 4 different areas that we sort of think about as we decided to engage the LA Chamber. One is around policy and advocacy. A second is around programs. A third is around systems change. And a fourth is around messaging and communications. So I'm going to touch on a little bit of each of those from my perspective, and then Jack Scott and Alma Salazar will go deeper in a couple of these areas. So I'll start out a little bit with both some of our policy and some of our program. So first of all, one of the things that started to really affect us as we were doing more and more research on California and how California's economy was doing is research that was put out by one of our most prestigious institutes in California. It's called the Public Policy Institute of California. And they did some research that showed the direct link between educational attainment and per capita income. And that if we can't create an increase in educational attainment, you cannot create an increase in per capita income. And obviously, we all know that that's one of the most fundamental drivers of economic health and growth. And that further, this came out many years ago, almost a decade ago, that California was on track for the first time in history to have lower educational attainment than a previous generation. In other words, it sort of goes without thinking, and it was a bit of a wake-up shock to us that we in the United States of America have always improved educational attainment for each successive generation. And we came to just take it for granted. That would always be our own legacy of success, that our children would do better than we and theirs than theirs. And the research, when it showed us that based on California's overall trends, the next generation would have lower educational attainment than our current generation, I think, first of all, we, like most, didn't want to believe it. That was our first reaction, is just deny it, pretend like it must be flawed. But our second reaction was to study it deeply and think about it, learn about it. And I think we came to understand that, in fact, without leadership and our own engagement, that was, in fact, sound research, and we had an imperative to get engaged and to think about the questions. So as we started to focus on this area more and more, and that wasn't the only reason, but it was certainly incisive, a big area that we became very engaged in on the program level, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about program, is financial aid and access to financial aid, because California had made a serious commitment to all children of need to establish a statewide entitlement of financial aid, what we call Cal Grant. But unless a young person would fill out their FAFSA form, they would not be eligible for California's financial aid. And that disproportionately, the young people that most needed it were the ones least likely to actually fill out their FAFSA and then understand that it's available to them and do what they need to do to get the financial aid. So that had sort of a perverse effect of saying we are making a pledge and we're making money available, but the fact is we were doing very little to make sure that those that we intended to get it, needed it the most, actually had practical help to do that. So as we learned about that and tried to think about how we could help, we learned about a national effort that the Lumina Foundation had stimulated called College Goal Sunday to help do workshops throughout originally Indiana, and then had started spreading all over the country. And California had a nascent effort to do it. And we got our minds around the sort of idea that that was such a natural thing for a chamber to be a part of and help. And not only that, then to fully embrace. And so we have a flyer toward the end, and Alma will go deeper to talk about what we now renamed Cash for College, an effort to help young people fill out their FAFSA and to get financial aid. And so that to us is an example of a programmatic effort that we engaged in and have felt very confident makes a very serious difference. And it gets toward this issue of access, of trying to make sure that the possibility that all young people have access to college is real. In this case, the barrier we're trying to overcome, of course, is affordability and financial aid access. So then the next thing that we really started focusing on is policy. As we continue to try to think about what policies would be helpful to improve college attainment, California had started entering its historic budget crisis, and we were cutting community college funding and our funding to all our public higher ed just dramatically. And we started advocating for more judicial cuts and where possible, some judicial investments at the earliest possible date. We found ourselves, like all Californians, struggling with the fact that we just had these huge deficits. So seemed like there was no option except for how much you cut. And as we did that, we started advocating judiciously for reinvestments as California's economy returned. And that's when I started working more closely with Jack Scott, who you'll hear from shortly. And one of the things that we realized is that we seem to be in a stalemate in California, like probably some of your states, because there were some reformers that said higher ed needs to change, get its house in order and make changes and do more with the same amount of money before we're going to give them anything else. Because their problem is not money. Their problem is they need to get fixed. And then there was another crowd. It was mostly the stakeholder crowd, the faculty and the leaders of the educational institutions said our issue is primarily money and you just need to invest in us properly. And that led to what seemed to us as a stalemate because there was equal forces on opposite sides and no one could agree and then we wouldn't do anything. And so frankly, I approached Jack Scott and I suggested I thought the LA Chamber could be a voice on the side of it's going to take both. We need to transcend this all or nothing or either or debate stalemate. And so we're prepared to say we need to put more money into California Community College and our public universities, but simultaneously that we also need to do different things. And so it's not one or the other. You don't have to say make the changes first before we give you another penny or put another penny in before you make another change. And Jack agreed. And I think that became a beginning of a very serious partnership that Jack Scott and the Chancellor's Office of Community Colleges for California and the LA Chamber started working much more closely together. And it led us to put forward legislation that would very seriously improve community college outcomes that Jack will go into more deeply. We also were very committed to being on the record repeatedly to argue for increased investments in California community colleges because we believed in it and also we felt it was critical to have credibility with the community college world that they saw that we were on the side of saying we need to further invest, albeit smarter investments, but investments nonetheless. So that'll be one of the things that I'll invite Jack to kind of talk about how that affected our credibility and influence in the areas of reform and improvement. And then that also touches on messaging and communication. So we developed advocacy pieces and communications where we consistently came out with messages that said that California community colleges, California public universities are crucial to the economic health and success of the state. It needs investment, but we also need to think about ways of improving and outcomes. And so that was part of a constant communications effort that we did. And then finally, the fourth bucket is systems change. And what we decided locally is we needed to do a better job of trying to get what we called our cradle to career partners, our partners from birth to 5, our K-12 partners, our higher ed institutions, and other civic partners like the city, our City of Los Angeles, our County Federation of Labor, United Way, get them on the same page. So we stopped blowing each other up and blaming each other for public education, and we got onto the same page and said we need to work together toward common goals. And so that's what we call systems change. And Jesse has up our LA Compact, which is the work we did to try to bring all these partners together, get them on one set of goals, and get them functioning more as a system to serve students and beyond the tendency where we each just look at our own domains. So you see we created this higher ed collaborative where we got the chancellors and presidents of USC, UCLA, the community college system, our CSUs and private universities, all on the same page. And we convened these groups and consistently help them focus on institutional changes and collaborations that improve student outcomes. So that gives you a little bit of kind of how we went across the high level of each of these big buckets. And I would just say, after doing this now for me personally, it's better part of 14 years, but very deeply with the higher ed community these last 5 to 8 years, the sort of natural tendency of the educational institutions to think that the business community just sort of wants to say you ought to run more like a business, or we kind of just blame each other. That was the part we got stuck into our early years. And when we moved beyond that to trying to be real students of what's happening, and then partners with our educational team, but also provocateurs at times, it helped us transcend, I think, that sort of traditional, almost stereotypical relationship, and increasingly in the last 4 to 5 years, be a real constructive partner of change. So, that I'm interested in how Jack might give his perspective of how he sees it, because there was a time when we had a bill and Jack was successful at killing our bill. And so we had to learn how to work together and how to be understanding of each other's reality, and then how to actually be effective partners. So why don't I leave it there, and I'll transition to my colleague. And so am I going to just transition to Jack? Or okay, so I'll turn it over to you.
Well, I certainly want to second what David Rattray is saying about the importance of collaboration between business and higher education. And we don't need to be shouting at each other. That's a very unproductive kind of relationship. What we need is the recognition how much that business needs higher education and how much higher education needs business. Business obviously needs the trained personnel that comes from higher education. In fact, we did a study here in California, and we need to turn out far more college graduates than we are right now. The Public Policy Institute said by 2025 that we needed 1 million more college graduates. So obviously business needs what college can provide, but just as much higher education needs the input of business. For one thing, business can tell us what our curriculum ought to be, how we can better prepare individuals. That, of course, will serve not only the individuals, but it will also serve business in general. A recent study indicated that the average college graduate, compared to just one who has a high school diploma, will earn $1 million more in his or her lifetime. So we can see business can input to higher education, can on occasions even provide financial assistance, and in turn, education can listen to business, can change its curriculum, can take the steps that are necessary, and so turn out better trained personnel. Well, let me tell you a little bit about an example, the Student Success Task Force. David and I talked about this possibility because one of the things we discovered in community colleges is that we were doing a tremendously good job of access. A lot of students were coming our way in California. In fact, we had a very high participation rate. Today we educate 2.5 million students in California community colleges. But we weren't as good in the success category. Too many of our individuals were dropping out, our students. They weren't getting the certificates that they were hoping to get, and they weren't transferring to four-year institutions. So we collaborated in a way in which we talked about how can we improve community colleges so that they can turn out a greater degree of student success. And here's how we did it. We had a bill that simply said we will form a Student Success Task Force. But we deliberately said it's not going to be simply a document that's going to be put on a shelf and not acted on. So we got together 20 members of this task force, government members, certainly representatives of the community colleges, academic researchers, and business was represented, particularly in the fact that David Rattray was a very important participant, as well as on occasions when he couldn't be there, Alma Salazar was there. So we were able to we worked for an entire year in 2011. We listened to experts from around the country about what makes for good student success. We took input from the field. In fact, we had 4 town hall meetings. And then we moved towards some solid recommendations. We knew that we had to make change and that we needed to prepare community colleges and work with community colleges so that they would be more effective in turning out individuals that would be of great help to the business world. So after a year of study, we came up with 22 recommendations. Now, we kept in close touch with our Board of Governors. We kept in close touch with the legislature. So when we adopted those 22 recommendations, the Board of Governors of the California Community Colleges adopted those recommendations without a dissenting vote. We then moved to the legislature because the legislature had the bill that actually formed the task force, and we were able to get foundation support, incidentally, that helped us with this task force in order to bring the experts, in order to hold the meetings, the town hall meetings and other things. And then we asked one of the leading legislators, Senator Alan Lowenthal, to author a bill, Senate Bill 1456, that would in turn underwrite and indicate how that they were going to be helpful in terms of the Student Success Task Force. Now, anytime you want to implement change, you're going to run into some opposition. And we did have some opposition. We had some internal opposition within the community colleges, some individuals, faculty and others who were not wanting to make those kinds of changes. But we were able to get a lot of support also within the community college from the business community and from the legislators in general, because when the legislative bill went through both houses in California, it was then signed into law by the governor. And I'm very proud to report that in the 2014-15 budget proposed by Governor Jerry Brown, he set aside $100 million for this Student Success Task Force. So this became an idea whose time had come. Let me tell you a little bit about some of our recommendations. I won't go into all of them. Time wouldn't permit that. But let me tell you some solid recommendations and the fact that they're being implemented either by the Board of Governors or by the legislature, or in some cases by pointing out these are the best practices and putting them right down at the community college level of the individual local community college. We recognized that, number one, we had to have good collaboration between high schools and colleges. We recognized that the teachers of subject matter needed to be collaborating together, and we were very supportive of the drive toward Common Core standards, which of course is a nationwide effort. We realized that we really needed to do something for entering students. We decided that mandatory orientation would be valuable. That not only that, but the same kind of diagnostic assessment that it should be taken in every college so that that would be transferable from one community college to the other. And then we would say to students, we want you as soon as possible to indicate what your program of study is going to be. All the studies indicate that the sooner a student decides what his or her program of study will be, they are more likely to achieve it. If someone simply comes in and wanders around and takes a lot of courses but with no desired outcome, it's much more likely that that person will drop out. Then we decided to incentivize student behavior. Before, we had a wonderful tuition-free opportunity for students who didn't have the kind of money that was necessary to go into the community college, but unfortunately we hadn't placed the kind of requirements on them to say that if you're on probation for 2 semesters, you'll lose that tuition-free opportunity. We also began to talk about enrollment priorities at each community college. We indicated that we wanted to improve our remedial education. In California, about 70% of the students who enter community colleges are either deficient in English or in math. And too often, the basic skills, the remedial courses, had become too lengthy, and there was a high dropout rate. So we looked at alternative ways to teach remedial education so that it would be more relevant to certain course matters. And we also looked at the fact of through this means we could have perhaps an accelerated way of basic skills teaching. We also implemented a student success scorecard, saying that every college would have a scorecard indicating how many, and we began to indicate what the indices of that scorecard would be, that those that would move, how many get to 30 units, how many get to 60 units, how many are able to get their certificate, how many do a transfer, and we would break that down not only in terms of the total amount, but by ethnicity, so that we could see if there's an achievement gap. And so in that way, you can see that we made some dramatic ways. I could go into greater detail, but we don't have the time this morning. But this is a way that business and higher education can collaborate. It serves business extremely well because better prepared students are going to be employed by them, and in turn it serves higher education well because we're getting the kind of input from business that tells us what kind of curriculum ought to be offered, and in many cases, sometimes particularly in our career technical programs, we're getting equipment and other things that help us in the community colleges. So I am a very strong advocate for collaboration between business and higher education. I'm pleased to work with the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce as an advisor in this area, and certainly I would simply say that the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce is open to sharing its abilities with others. And so if you would like to either talk with myself or with David Rattray by phone, or perhaps even send one of us on a personal contact to talk to your particular chamber, we would be glad to work with you in that respect.
Thank you, Jack. And I guess I just want to punctuate this David Rattray again. Jack's long career as initially within the community college system and being a community college president, then being an elected legislator in California and getting bills through and understanding the political and policy process, and then moving back to head the entire community college system, it gives him a unique perspective for both the sort of executive responsibilities of running higher ed, as well as the legislative and policy-making process. And so that's one of the reasons why I think we were able to get so much done in California, and I wanted just to underscore that he is available to all of you and to ACCE members to help you think about both the policy, the politics, and the higher ed issues that are necessary to make this kind of impactful changes.
And this is Alicia with the LA Chamber as well. You can email myself or you can email Jesse at ACCE anytime if you want to connect with any of our speakers on today's call or any call.
So now we'll turn it over to Alma.
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be with you today and to join David and Jack on this call. So really what I wanted to focus my remarks on is really go deeply into some of the programmatic efforts that the LA Chamber has helped lead. But I think piggybacking on Jack's remarks in terms of where the Chamber has played an instrumental role both as in a policy frame as well as continuing to work in partnership with the Chancellor's Office, and advocacy for these policies are absolutely instrumental to student access and success. To share with you some of the work that's on the horizon that we're doing here in Los Angeles in partnership with our local community colleges, where I would say that largely it's been focused up until now largely on the policy work, but really trying to pivot the work in terms of how do we operationalize these policies that are moving forward and ensure that as we talk about the student success task force recommendations, that they're being faithfully implemented at the local level where they count and they matter and are directly impacting students. So I'll share with you very briefly in terms of some of the work that we're presently engaged in and that we will continue to support and participate in, but really underscoring the importance of where chambers can not only play a policy advocacy role, but where we also are instrumental in having an intermediary function. So we were very fortunate to partner with Los Angeles Trade Technical College here in LA to really begin to explore and to implement these Student Success Task Force recommendations, but looking much more deeply at a competency-based approach. So our efforts are presently focused around how do we support LA Trade Tech in identifying a competency-based approach where we're trying to really look at ways in which we can innovate and ensure that students are being awarded credit not just based on a credit hour, but identifying competencies that then will allow these young adults to excel through their programs and take into consideration the level of expertise and experience that they may bring but understanding that as you reframe it into a competency-based approach, that presently there is no system or process by which to facilitate the awarding of these competencies, and really looking at new ways in which we can innovate and reframe, and really kind of taking the recommendations one step further. Through this work, we will continue to leverage the Chamber's ability in establishing rapid response policy teams. So as we look at these innovative approaches, identifying where there may be some internal and external advocates that we can bring to the helm to help us continue to push these innovative policies forward, and then trying to identify data metrics and workforce outcomes that will really be the driver and be congruent with what employers are expecting of young adults, and particularly in the three core sector areas that have been identified, with which I believe are health, advanced manufacturing, and media design. So again, that just gives you context for where we're continuing to partner and ensure that these policies are being implemented and having a direct impact on students. Secondly, I should mention that additionally, as David mentioned earlier, another area where we've had tremendous success has been in our Cash for College initiative, which, as David mentioned briefly, began for us 12, 13 years ago. And really, when we became engaged in that campaign, there was a research study that had come from the Tomás Rivera Policy Institute that indicated that although there was a high need and a high demand, especially among, immigrant, low-income families, of the need for financial aid resources, those financial aid resources were going underutilized. And it was large part because either families either didn't have the means or the social capital to access these resources, but more importantly, it was just the lack of college knowledge, and families really making decisions, or students making decisions about their college future under the auspices that financial aid resources either didn't exist, and limiting their post-secondary options. So when we began Cash for College, it was really under the auspices of a social awareness campaign, really tied to a direct programmatic effort. So for us, it's been really, again, being an intermediary broker, bringing together all of our systems and institutional partners together towards the collective goal of educating students and families about the financial aid resources that exist for them. So for us, it's really relied on a large, comprehensive marketing, social awareness campaign, getting the information out to students and families, leveraging our media partners to make this information available, and really getting our systems partners to coalesce collectively around the importance of sharing this information. But of course, for us, the information in of itself was insufficient. It's also how do we directly provide the programmatic support to ensure that students and families are getting the support and the services that they need. So for us, the campaign is really broken in, I'd say, kind of 4 major segments. We have our big college and career convention that is hosted in the fall. Our convention was always intended as a precursor to the financial aid workshops that are hosted in the winter. The idea being that if we have this big convention, we're starting to begin to plant the seed of the importance of going to college, and starting to motivate and engage students and families early. So our convention that's hosted annually, we have approximately 13,000 young adults who visit this convention, all focused on helping students, provide them with a financial aid overview, connect them with various resources on college-going culture and all the things that they need to prepare to go to college. And then thirdly, connecting them directly to colleges and universities and having representatives there who can begin to engage them about the different types of post-secondary options that are available to them. But in the winter, it's really where we focus on our financial aid workshop offerings. We're here in the LA Basin, just to give you an order of magnitude, this season, which we're presently in, for our financial aid season, which begins January and ends March 2nd. We'll host 180 workshops. Last year, we had nearly 8,000 young adults participate in these workshops, and the workshops are all geared directly towards helping students and families complete the financial aid forms and rallying the volunteer support and the expertise and the content of folks who can guide students through what many still perceive as an arduous process in completing financial aid forms. These workshops are all free and open to the public. Of course, the Chamber doesn't organize each and every one, but our role has been primarily to be the lead organizer in orchestrating and supporting our local high schools, community-based organizations, higher ed institutions to host these workshops, and really, in many ways, trying to provide a just-add-water approach in providing the support and the mechanisms to allow our local partners to be able to facilitate these workshops with our help and our support. To give you a sense of order of magnitude in terms of the impact that this has had, we know based on last year's data, we had nearly 8,000 young adults who participated in these workshops, and our data reveals that of the young adults who participated in these workshops, they were able to access over $37 million in student financial aid. The third element of our campaign focuses on hosting a scholarship reception. We've been very fortunate through the help of philanthropy and other partners to be able to provide a scholarship program that allows us to incentivize getting young adults to these workshops and really encouraging them not only to access these scholarships that are made available through our campaign, but more importantly, accessing the state and federal financial aid resources that are available to them. And of course, for us, culminating in a reception that honors all these scholarship recipients and making sure that we're making these scholarship opportunities available to allow them to continue to fulfill their college and career dreams. So hopefully that's provided some frame for our Cash for College initiative. I know many chambers have very similar programs, but again, we are always here as a resource and can provide some guidance and framework in terms of how to facilitate these campaigns in a way where we're able to provide direct services to students and their families.
Thank you, Alma. And I'm going to turn it over to Alicia, but be thinking about your questions now. We're going to open it up for questions. And as you're thinking about your questions, I'll just make one other comment related to what Alma just said. Alma, what was the amount of scholarships that we were able to give out last year?
I believe we gave out nearly $500,000 in scholarships.
And what's been remarkable is as the community sees a Chamber of Commerce granting that degree of scholarships and then helping $37 million, it's spectacular the amount of goodwill that we gain through that, which we spend in political capital to force reform. Make no mistake about it. But also our members, our blue chip companies, which are the same as yours, they want to fund this because this really looks good if you're a Fortune 500 institution and a chamber member, and you get to affiliate with this kind of strength and goodwill in your community. So just, as you look at the flyer there that Jesse has up, you can see an example of some of these sponsors. They are very proud to contribute volunteer time and pro bono resources, but also hard cash toward funding these efforts. So know that it does create sort of immediate benefit to the chamber membership. And while, as Alma said, we don't try to run all these workshops, it's almost like a franchise. We're more like a franchisor where we put the frame around it, but we get tremendous community support to actually operate all the workshops. So Alicia, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists, and we now have about 10 minutes for Q&A. If you have a question for any one of our panelists, please go ahead and type it in on the webinar, and Jesse will unmute you. While we're waiting for some questions, I wanted to get us started. Alma, you mentioned implementation, and can you talk a little bit more about the role the Chamber plays when pivoting from an advocacy role to more of an intermediary role regarding implementation?
Sure. I think for us it's really oftentimes when we're working with institutional partners, they may be limited by their respective institutions or governance structure. And I think the Chamber's ability to be able to be an external advocate, to be able to represent the voice of business, allows us greater leverage and opportunity to serve that intermediary function and speak on behalf of the institution in terms of why some of these critical student success policies are needed. So I hope that adequately answers the question, or David, if there's anything you'd like to add.
Well, I mean, needless to say, we do get in dicey situations sometimes that that you all would know where, let's say, a community college or a public university or private university, they're on the board of directors of, say, the LA Chamber, or they're a major member contributor, and they sometimes worry that we're gone too far. We're being too aggressive on the reform agenda, and so we have to make sure that we're sort of sensitive to understanding and appreciating that point of view, and we're engaging directly. So, for example, if we would take a strong position on some issue of legislation, like our governor last year proposed a very aggressive performance funding agenda that would tie some additional funds to improve outcomes for our public segments. Alma and I wanted the LA Chamber to come out really strong in support of the governor's proposals. But what was important is we needed to reach out to USC and UCLA and our CSUs and let them know that we believe this is probably wise policy. And I had a couple major members that said, you know, we think it's wrong-headed. And then we had to have very good discussion to make sure that we're not doing anything that's going to cause us to lose membership or to feel like we're not being open-minded to this. But at the end of the day, we worked through that, and we still came out in support. We probably smoothed it a little bit from what edge we might have had. Anyway, so that's just a practical example, not so much on the intermediary, but the sort of reality of taking this stuff to market.
Let me make a comment as a former legislator and also as Chancellor Emeritus of the California Community Colleges. I often found that to have the LA Chamber listed as one of the proponents of either a bill that I was authoring or the fact that a drive such as the Student Success Task Force was extremely important. Number one, because of the quality of their input. They often had some excellent ideas, but not only that, it helped get legislators' attention, particularly legislators who had a very favorable opinion of the Los Angeles Chamber, and to see it as representative of business supporting a particular educational matter was extremely helpful.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
So we have one question. Heather with Lancaster Chamber said that they're committed to better connecting businesses and education, but feel like we continuously struggle with getting the business community engaged on the initiative. They recognize the importance of the business community, but don't necessarily engage when they make the case. Was there a point in time where you felt one thing or another got the business community more engaged and active?
I'll start with it, but Alma, think about your own perspective on this. As I mentioned in terms of that PPIC, the Public Policy Institute of California, I think it was really important that we continued to look for the business case statement and research or just practical, reality of how to make the case that, for example, it's one thing to say you're not going to get a workforce that's going to drive your talent. It's even more to say, and by the way, you're not going to have growing income in your region, because if people don't have an education, they're not growing their own income, and they can't buy the goods and services of your member companies. And I think what we tried to pound home over and over is how big a stake you have in this, and that if you have a trajectory of lower and lower educational attainment, that is a downward death spiral to your overall regional economy. You can't stand by on the sidelines. You have to be engaged if you're going to grow your economy on the question around collegiate attainment. Alma, do you have some other thoughts on how did we sort of try to gain more engagement?
From our business partners and our employers. Well, and just what I think, at least in some of my experiences, I mean, that was really the framing message. But I know when we've kind of pivoted to focus on particular industry sectors where there is a high demand, I think our employers already recognize and see where there are some gaps, both in the pool and in quality of candidates available to them. So getting them to engage on this issue was a much softer sell. So in some instances, we've been able to, like I said, especially in kind of our sectoral approach, highlight where, whether it's health or other industries, where the need has been. It's been an opportunity to engage them much more deeply.
Jesse, do we have any other audience questions?
We don't. I can go ahead and unmute the audience at this point if anybody wants to just ask a question verbally, and we can continue that way.
That would be great. Let's go ahead and unmute everyone on the call. Thank you. If everyone can hear me, do we have any audience questions that you'd like to verbally ask any one of our panelists? We have a little bit of feedback. Why don't we go ahead and mute everyone again just to back. If anyone has additional questions on the webinar, and in the meantime, I just wanted to ask all three of our panelists if they have any tips on coalition building. Oftentimes the Chamber has relationships with a number of key stakeholders in the community, and a lot of the systems reform efforts or something like the Student Success Task Force certainly brings together a lot of different stakeholders. So I'm just curious if you have any tips to share with the other chambers on the phone about bringing together the different stakeholders.
Well, I would simply say that you've got to break the ice. I think it's very necessary for often chambers to reach out to institutions of higher education, particularly the CEOs. You may find a very receptive audience, but as one who served as president of two different colleges, frequently the president is overwhelmed by just the minutia of everyday things and doesn't think about the possibility of how that it would be a very meaningful relationship between his or her institution and the chamber. And so frequently, since we're speaking now to chamber members, let me encourage you to say that in many cases, if you'll pick up the phone or in some kind of face-to-face meeting to talk to a CEO about how you'd like to form meaningful relationships between the chamber and institutions of higher education, you might be pleasantly surprised at how open a CEO would be to that, and yet because of the rush of his or her own business, they have not reached out to you. So I would say that incidentally, if I were speaking to a group of CEOs, I would certainly encourage them to do the same thing vis-a-vis the chambers. But since this is an audience of chamber individuals, I would simply say that I think you might find a real reception. I know in the community colleges, we have a requirement of all of our career technical programs that they have an advisory committee that meets regularly to indicate input, whether it be in auto tech or nursing or any of our other programs of career technical nature. So that's the only word I would say.
I have another
Any other questions from the audience, Jesse?
Sure. From Lydia Johnson, she's asking, have you seen more students going into the fields you mentioned as far as advanced manufacturing, health, and media design? In other words, what outcomes have you seen?
I'll just take a stab, and then Alma or Jack come in. For sure, I think what we're seeing is, as Jack mentioned, the reform is meant to incentivize students to develop a career plan earlier in their educational experience at community colleges. And I think what we're going to see is much more acceleration in terms of people picking one of those high-demand careers. But these reforms that we just referred to are very young, so we're not far enough into them that we could actually see specific outcomes in some of those high-demand sectors that you just mentioned. I think earlier work that Alma's been involved in on healthcare and some of these others, and Jack has been stimulating for years, has probably got more of the specific outcomes. So I'll invite either of them to comment.
Well, let me comment on a specific example at Pasadena City College. In the Pasadena area, there's a growing field of biotechnology. And as a result of a collaboration between that industry and Pasadena City College, we created a program to, the outcome would be those who would get a certificate as biotechnicians. That was a 2-year program. And we found that every one of the graduates of that program were immediately employed. That was a wonderful collaboration between biotechnology and Pasadena City College, where there was a need in the industry. Certainly they needed research scientists, but they also needed the individuals at a lower level, biotechnicians. And Pasadena City College was the ideal place to create that. So sometime as a result of contact between industry and a college, either a present field is improved, a present technical field is improved, or a new technician program is created.
So we have just about 5 minutes left on the call, and I wanted to make a couple of closing comments unless we have any other questions from the audience. Jesse, do we have any other questions?
There is one more question, and it is from Gail Landis. Are there any successful programs where the business community is engaged with middle or high school students, i.e. choices, where the business leaders conduct workshops in the classroom to learn about career paths and work ethic? And how do you engage volunteers?
Well, so we do a substantial amount of work ourselves in middle and high school reform around, we call it link learning, but really trying to integrate career education and college prep or academically rigorous education. And in those efforts, we recruit a lot of our companies to come into classrooms and to help advise curriculum and to make it more relevant for kids. And I wonder, that might be a good topic for a future EAD session, because that deals more with this middle school, high school question. So if you want to talk to us more directly about it, why don't we just suggest that you contact Alicia or Jesse, and we can go deeper on that directly with you, and know that that could be a topic for a whole session. And I'll just say one other thing as I turn it back over to Jesse and Alicia. It may seem like we're kind of like doing lots of things in lots of places. We had to start, just like Jack said, break the ice. And so we're available to you, Alma and Jack and I. Your biggest choice is your first choice, I know it feels like, which is how to figure out which part of the elephant you're going to bite into. And we can help you think about, do you want to make a policy move? Do you want to make a program move? Do you want to make a systems move or a communication? Any of these moves, it's important to sort of pick which one you want to go at, and we can help you think about assessing, where you want to take it, or you're already in it doing a bunch of it, and you want to figure out how do you make it better. So we're at your service to help you make those choices.
Great. Well, thank you so much to all three of our panelists, and thank you to everyone from both the Education and the Economic Development divisions of ACCE for joining us. As you heard on the call, the economic aspect of education attainment is certainly a great reason to further engage the business community in education and workforce development. And on that note, at ACCE's annual conference coming up in August in Cincinnati, we're going to have a combined education and economic development track. So you'll definitely be hearing more about the economic aspect of education attainment at the annual conference. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jesse just to remind everyone of some upcoming activities as well as resources available to you all.
Thanks, Alicia, for the updates and for moderating, and also, again, to our panelists for the great information and discussion. And I have included Alicia and I's contact information in the chat box, so you are welcome again if you need any kind of content expertise or even one-on-one consultations. Please email us. And another way to kind of do a one-on-one consultation is through the EAD self-evaluation assessment tool. It's kind of a diagnostic self-assessment where you evaluate to help you think through and evaluate your goals related to education and workforce development as far as potential partnerships and resources and future mission and vision. And so we're currently rolling that out to our advisory board and greater council, but if you would like that sooner rather than later, just please contact us and we'd be more than happy to send that your way and then follow up with the one-on-one consultation based on that assessment. Also, if you have any kind of case studies, best practices, anything that's happening as far as chamber news related to education workforce, we're always looking for content for our blog and to include in our Chamberpedia, which is our online resource to see how chambers are working in this field. And so please send us any materials that you have. Our next EAD Council webinar is going to be March 26th at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we'll be following up with more details about the content for that. We're also still accepting, content for the ACCE's upcoming annual convention. So, like Alicia mentioned, we're going to have a joint economic development and education attainment track, and so if you have any suggestions for potential topics, speakers, panel ideas, you can still send those to me. And last, the convention, please save the date. It's going to be this August 12th to 15th in Cincinnati, and it's ACC's 100th anniversary, so it will be great. And thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Jessie. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much.